Hey, it's Sean from the Commander's Brew. This is a deck tech on Satoru Umezawa. It's a ninjutsu, but with a couple of twists. Here's a commander that seems pretty obvious on the surface. Pretty straightforward, you're going to do some ninjutsu shenanigans, but when you start thinking about it, there's a lot of interesting choices to be made. Let me bring you the deck tale. Satoru Umezawa. Obviously, we're going to do ninjutsu. There's no surprise there with that second ability, making any creature in your hand have ninjutsu with 4, and getting card advantage every time you activate a ninjutsu ability. The interesting thing is, in my opinion, we're not running a ton of creatures that actually have ninjutsu. We're going to rely on Satoru making it happen. The fact that he costs 3 and the ability costs 4 is a nice ramp where you can cast Satoru on 3 and the very next turn you can start things going, if you want. So ninjutsu requires 2 parts, something to get through unblocked, and the cheaper the better since it's going to go back to our hand and we're going to cast it over and over again. Stuff like Triton Shore Stalker, Tormented Soul, even something like Spectral Sailor is a good option. Although it doesn't have native unblockability, the fact that you can cast Spectral Sailor with Flash just for a single blue means we can sneak it in other parts of turns. Maybe there's an opponent without any flying defense, looks at our board and thinks, well, there's nothing that can get through right now. Well, now there's a Spectral Sailor, so here we go. And there's tons of them. Slitherblade, Mist-Cloaked Herald. We've also got Changeling Outcast. I want to highlight Changeling Outcast because of the Shapeshifter ability, which might matter because there are things that care about ninjas and or rogues. Even as I said before that we don't actually run a ton of actual ninjas because we don't need to. So no matter which way we go with this deck, there's going to be a couple of cards that are just really key to making this run. I can't imagine any Satoru deck without running these ones. Grazilax, Illithid Scholar. The fact that we get to draw cards when we do combat damage to a player is big game alone, but Grazilax's key ability here is that when a creature becomes blocked, we may return it to our hand. That's key. Our opponents are going to want to block our little 1/1s if they can figure out a way. Maybe the Spectral Sailor, they're not all native unblockable. And this way we can return them to our hand, cast them again, and ninjutsu the ones that didn't get blocked. You've got 1 blocker, I've got 2 attackers. Doesn't matter what you do. I'm getting 1 through and the other one's not dying. Cunning Evasion, same thing, except it's just an enchantment, so it's a little bit harder to deal with. I'm happy to have it. And of course, although I said I'm not running a ton of actual ninjas, Silver Fur Master, this is the brand new rat ninja from Kamigawa. It has ninjutsu natively, but the key ability is that ninjutsu abilities we activate cost 1 less to activate. Getting Satoru's ability down to 3 mana is huge. We can get to 6 much easier than 8, so being able to activate twice versus 1.5 times is enormous. So who are our giant dumb creatures that we're ninjutsuing in? That's the other half of the equation, right? You got your little ones that are unblockable, and then we ninjutsu in something enormous for 4 mana, or 3 if the Silver Fur is out. And there's really no shortage of gigantic things. You could go with any number of classic value engines, kind of the all-star 6+ drops of EDH, and add some removal, ramp and draw, call it a day. We could go with a Consecrated Sphinx, drawing a ton of cards, maybe something like a Void Winnower to make our opponents' lives miserable, to make dealing with our stuff even more difficult in the future. Classic. I mean, Jin Gitaxia's Core Augur does make an appearance in Kamigawa, so you could argue that this is a flavorful include of a Satoru deck, but that's not what we're doing. We want to flex our style. But we're not going with those creatures. This is where the deck gets the most interesting. This is where you get a chance to show off your style. So what are we doing with our Satoru deck? Before we get to the specifics, I do want to talk about ways to protect Satoru. It's kind of our main game plan, so if people end up dealing with him too many times, it's going to be tough. Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Diplomatic Immunity, something like that. These are classic ways to protect your commander so no one can mess with you. I have to admit I'm not a huge fan of these methods for a couple big reasons. One, you get a ton of hate from it. When you've got a Swiftfoot Boots or a Lightning Greaves on the table and it's on your commander, your opponents know that you've got a bunch of stuff planned and it's telegraphed. You're basically telling the table, don't touch my thing because I'm going to do a lot of stuff with it. So of course, they're going to unite together to remove the equipment or the aura or wrath the board or something like that to deal with your commander because you've told them, please don't do it. And the other big reason is that I think the game's way more fun and dynamic, which is kind of the same thing for me, if you don't run permanent cards that just shut down interaction. I'd much rather have my protection come in the form of cards like Dive Down, an instant speed spell to give my commander hexproof, something like You See a Guard Approach, which is the same thing, but I also have the option of tapping a creature just in case that would help me get someone else through in another part of the game. Malachor Rebirth is another great way to protect a commander. The commander will come back to the battlefield tapped. I lose 2 life. That's no big deal. It doesn't stop from exile, but it does protect you from a wrath, whereas the hexproof ones don't. So there's a nice little variety of a package to kind of protect your commander from various situations. Or, I mean, it's fine by me if you'd rather just scrap the whole plan altogether and run straight counter spells to protect your commander. That's fine too. I'd recommend Familiar's Ruse, which is just a blue instant, and it counters a target spell, but you actually get to return a creature to its owner's hand. There's a lot of times where we will want to do that, so tying that into a commander spell seems fair, even though it's strictly more costly than classic counterspell. I'd also be interested in something like an Access Denied, the brand new one from the commander deck of this series. If you're not familiar, it's a 5-mana counter that creates X 1/1 colorless Thopters with flying, where X is that spell's mana value. That's probably a lot of Thopters. I hope it would be. So that's just more ways to get ninjutsu through. All those little flyers are going to be tough to block. A few of them will get through, and they're all candidates for ninjutsu. No good coming back to your hand, but that's the least of my concern. So I want to talk about a quick rules interaction, and it's about that elusive end of combat step that a lot of people keep forgetting about. It's sort of automatic. It happens after damage, but it's before the second main phase. There is a part of combat that exists after damage has been done. And if you're unblocked, you're unblocked. So you're allowed to ninjutsu something in after it's done damage. You attack with your little 1/1s, they get through, but before you ninjutsu them, you actually do the damage and you hold in the end of combat step.
Hold on, wait, hold on.
Cards like Bident of Thassa make this a really big game, so where we're going to want to actually connect with our little 1-drops that are unblockable, draw the cards from it, and then ninjutsu in something way bigger. Reconnaissance mission's another great way to do that. It also has cycling just in case you've got something out and you don't have time for this. I can't imagine a scenario where we wouldn't even want redundancy here. I'm happy to draw 2 cards for everyone that gets through. One ninja that gets my attention, a card that we will actually want a ninjutsu in before combat damage, Fallen Shinobi. This is one where we will want to do the combat damage with this creature, because when we do, we get to exile 2 cards of their library and we get to play them without paying their mana costs. Play them. Whenever we get to play a card, that includes lands. Whenever the game says cast, that excludes lands. So we can get extra lands this way. We can take their spells if we want to. Now, this is where things get interesting. This is where I start to imagine other things to do. What if we have a whole package like this? We could run cards like Thief of Sanity. Whenever it deals combat damage, we get to exile 1 permanently, cast it whenever we want. Nashi Moonsage's Scion is a new card from Kamigawa. It also has native ninjutsu, but we deal combat damage to a player. We'll exile the top card of each player's library. We get to play one of them. We can't play all of them, but we get to pay life instead of their mana cost to do it. So that's pretty incredible. And of course, Gonti Lord of Luxury is a similar kind of thing where we get to pick something out of our opponent's library and play that later. It kind of paints a bit of a ninja mind game thing going on. Another card that works real great for us if we're going to lean into this strategy is Rogue Class. I mean, right away, we get to give all of our little unblockables the extra ability of the Fallen Shinobi. And if we want to level it up to level 2, now our creatures have menace. I've been talking about our unblockable creatures a lot, but there will be times where we've already ninjutsu'd in something big, recast our little thing. I would love for that big thing to get in again. I want my Thief of Sanity to get in every turn it attacks. So giving all your creatures menace is pretty useful. And if we want to get up to 4 mana, we get to play cards exiled with Rogue Class. We get to spend mana of any color, so that we have to kind of work towards it. But our opponents will have to probably spend quality removal on this just because of the potential. I mean, if they're really clever, they'll wait until we sink the 4 mana into it. But if we've got instants under there, they may want to reconsider, especially if we have a counterspell or 2. And so if we're attacking like this, if we're planning on doing a lot of combat damage triggers, we got to look at some double strike. Now, it's so hard to get double strike native on a creature, so we have to look at things like equipment. Fire Shrieker is a 3-mana equipment, equips for 2, that's 5 total mana. I like it, but I don't love it. Grappling Hook, similarly, it costs 8 total when you cast and equip. Like I said, it's tough to get double strike and Dimir colors, and this is one way to do it. I don't love it because our creatures tend to come back to our hands, but that's when I started looking at something like Strionic Resonator. 2 to cast and just 2 to use the ability. If all I care about is a single combat trigger, this is a pretty useful way. I think I'd rather run something like this. And then, of course, one of the classic giant attackers in a Dimir deck is Rexiol, the Risen Deep. I mean, it does everything we want. It's got Island Walk and Swamp Walk, so it keeps getting through after the first time. Even if we've ninjutsu'd it in, we get to cast spells out of their graveyard by doing the combat damage. If I can give Rexiol double strike or use a Strionic Resonator somehow to get the effect a second time, Rexiol is a classic. We've got a few larger creatures on the board. Now we're drawing a few cards. We've got some ways to protect our business here. And as I started looking for other ways to make things unblockable, Key to the City came up. Key to the City technically has a 0 mana way to make a creature unblockable. We kind of have to pay for it by discarding a card, and we get to pay mana to get that card back later if we really want to. But here's another example where deck choices lead to further deck choices, because now we can think about madness as a real option. Kitchen Imp is a 2/2 flying haste that can be cast for 1 if we're madnessing it in. Great ninjutsu target. Big Game Hunter also ninjutsus in for a single black mana, in addition with this great ETB ability of destroying a big creature. And if Big Game Hunter can get through, I'm happy to pick it up and just drop it one more time. And of course, Shadow Grange Archfiend becomes an excellent ninjutsu target as a 7 mana spell on its own, but I can also madness it for 2 and a black and pay 8 life. Doing 8 damage as a surprise is nothing to sneeze at. In addition, making each opponent sack their biggest creature and we gain a ton of life. I want this card to come in and out as many times as possible. And then how do you feel about a card like Necrogoyf? Madness is in for 3. Power equal to the number of creatures in all graveyards. I don't suspect that we will be taking maximum advantage of this. We're not really trying to fill our graveyard as fast as possible. We could luck out and be able to get its power up to 13, 14 if our opponents are doing something with their graveyards. But I'm kind of drawn to the other part of the card here. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card. So how mean do we want to be with this deck? We can do discard. Card like Dream Stealer is pretty nice. It's got built-in menace, but whenever it deals combat damage, that player discards that many cards. We're expected to eternalize it at some point and make it into a 4/4, but I'm happy to ninjutsu this in. Scythe Spectre is a 6 mana creature, so I'm definitely hoping to ninjutsu this in. And I'm going to sneak it in. They're not going to know it's coming, but it's going to deal combat damage to a player, and each opponent is going to discard a card. One of them is going to lose life too. I love it. Double that trigger, everyone discards 2. I'm a big fan of that. And if you got a spare $10 lying around, Archon of Cruelty is a very nice add. 8 mana to start, so we kind of have to ninjutsu it in, but every time it enters the battlefield or attacks, one opponent's going to sack a creature or planeswalker, discard a card, and lose 3 life, and we're going to draw a card and gain 3 life. Now, this is on attacks, so if we ninjutsu this in, we will only get the ETB. We will not get the on attack trigger because it's too late. We're past our attackers, but we are going to do 6 damage with it, which is fine. And there's one other little aspect here is you could go all in on this. I didn't. I kind of kept it to a little bit of a flavor, a little spice, if you will. But if you wanted, you could go big sea monster with Runo Stromkirk. I mean, whether we ninjutsu in Runo or just cast him straight up, we get to put our best thing from the graveyard on top of our library. I'm probably going to draw it before my next turn begins, so that's very useful. But also being able to stack what's on top of the deck. We've got a lot of fairly large creatures. Getting something with 6 mana or greater on top is not that difficult. And if we're able to transform talks about krakens, leviathans, and octopuses and serpents. We get creating those 2 tokens, but I just realized you don't have to. Like, you can just create a copy of another target attacking creature, one of our ETB creatures. Those will be excellent. I mean, we have a couple though, if you want. Spawning Kraken's a nice one. If we ninjutsu this in without Runo, I'm still getting that extra 9/9 blue Kraken anyway. And Gyruda, Doom of Depths. Although this is legendary, if Runo attacks with Gyruda, we won't be able to make 2 tokens that stay on the board, but we still get that amazing ETB ability of just milling people and then putting the best card onto the battlefield under our control, as long as it's even. I mean, that's gearing up to be the better part of the deck, and I still haven't really talked about a lot of cards that say ninjutsu on them. A couple here and there, but that's mainly because of the Yuriko effect. Ever since Yuriko came out, some of the actual ninjas that were printed before got real expensive, like Silent Blade Oni. Very useful ability, but that's over $10. Higure the Still Wind. This is another ninja that's too expensive. I mean, I'd love to run it, but it's too much. It's over $10. Ink Eyes is $25. That's just too much. And I mean, we're all thinking about him, but Sakashima's student, guess how much this card is? $65. But fortunately, Satoru kind of becomes like the budget ninjutsu deck now that Yuriko made all these cards so expensive. Yuriko herself's over $10. So I'm very grateful they printed them, and I'm grateful that we get to run a deck like this. It seems super fun. And I couldn't do it alone. I want to thank our Discord helpers. Chiefy, Nosrak2, Groove Chicken, Papadio, Mondo, Pips Don't Lie. Thanks, team. So this deck actually comes in pretty cheap. I'm not going to count the value of the lands or the mana rocks because you'll run whatever you have. If you want to run $100 lands, that's up to you. But the cards I talked to about came up to about $50. The most expensive one's Archon of Cruelty, as I mentioned. That's a $10 card. Rexiel the Risen Deep is up to $9. That's a surprise to me. And the Fallen Shinobi, one of the few ninjas we are running. It's the Yuriko effect, right? It's up to $6 here. I think you could cut them. You could keep them. It's up to you. But this seems like a really fun deck, and there's a lot of ways to go with it. So let me know in the comments which way you went with it. What are your favorite cards to sneak in with ninjutsu? Until next time, catch you later.